Leoš Janáček. Who was he? He was one of the greatest musical figures of the 20th, and to develop his style because it was so unique. He worked very hard as a teacher. He founded his own school in the city of Brno, where he was from. Janáček, in his younger years, he befriended the older Antonín Dvořák. They were very good friends. Janáček spent a lot of time going around his native countryside and listening to folk music. The Czech Republic is rich in folk music. There's a saying in Czech, každý Čech muzikant, every Czech is a musician. If you look at this small country, which is about the size of Michigan, it has produced not just great hockey players and wonderful beer and so many amazing other things, but great composers like Smetana, Dvořák, Martinu, Bohuslav Martinu in the 20th century. Part of the reason for this is this rich culture of folk music that everyone grows up with. This is really the root of pretty much all Czech music. So Janáček, around 1900, went around the Moravian countryside collecting folk music, writing it down, listening to people, going from region to region, thousands of folk songs. He wrote wonderful arrangements for piano and voice. Most of what he did is he studied it so thoroughly it became infused into his style. So we often will hear, and in the Cunning Little Vixen, we hear several sections that sound like wonderful folk music. You could dance to, you can hum, you can sing the tunes, just great. But he actually wrote those tunes himself. The words on those particular parts are actual folk texts, but he wrote his own music. So after he did this, and this is an integral part of his style, after he did this, he went around the countryside again, but doing something different. He was just listening in on people, conversations in all sorts of situations. A woman calling her chickens, for example, speaking of chickens, which are in the opera. People having conversations on the street, and then trying to write those down, trying to capture what pitches, if I sang those little phrases these people are saying, what pitches would those be on? And how can I capture the emotions that they have when they're saying those words? How can I do that? And he actually did that for the rest of his life, through the 1920s. He called these speech melodies, usually short melodies, just derived from natural speech. So these make their way into the music. And again, it's not just the inflection of the words, but it's the emotion behind the words. So if you have special emotion-packed words, they often find their way into the orchestra, become part of the fabric. But never in an academic or pedantic way. They're all just very intuitive and very organic and just become part of the whole sound. This goes hand in hand with how Janáček set the words and his type of libretto that he wrote. He was one of the very first to set prose text in an opera rather than poetic text, where you have a set rhyme scheme and you set rhythmical scheme, metric scheme. He was setting natural prose, and he was setting it with natural inflection. So he was trying to capture the natural inflection of the Czech language exactly, and with pitches, how a person would say these words in this situation with these emotions. And the result is that most of the music is in real conversational time. So that gives a very realistic, natural element to the whole opera. And then when you have those special moments where the music is stretched out, where it becomes more lyrical, they become all the more super special. From the moment the audience hears the first few notes, you're into this unique world of nature that Janáček has created with sound. It's how do you describe him? A modernist, romanticist? Some people say the Cunning Little Vixen is his most impressionistic opera. I think he's just so unique. You can't really put a label on him. So what to listen for? I think just to open your ears, because you will hear something very unique. It's all very tonal, very beautiful, very colorful. Yes, there are moments of romanticism, moments of what you might call impressionism, moments of maybe minimalism because of these fantastic, energetic fragments in the orchestra, short and repeated, and then changing like a kaleidoscope of colors, of different colors. It's all of this. Janáček had an incredible sense for theater, for timing, for drama, for pacing. Most of the music is based on natural speech. Most of the music happens in real time. All of Janáček's operas, except for Jenůfa, are less than 2 hours. They're more like the length of a film, and they're very cinematic. The Czechs, even today, they love nature. They're very attuned to nature. A national pastime in the Czech Republic is mushroom picking. And you see this at the end of the opera the Forster talks about. He was with his wife right after their wedding and trampling on the mushrooms because they were so in love they didn't even see them. Janáček loved nature. He took long walks. And besides trying to capture people's speech on paper, he also listened to birds and all sorts of different animals and tried to write those down also. So he was very perceptive of the world around him. This opera speaks to us, this music speaks to us because it deals with universal feelings, universal truths, universal relationships. It hones in on love, lost opportunities, how we deal with that, and this wonderful, wonderful life-affirming moment of the whole opera, which I think we need now. We need nowadays the circle of life and seeing the beauty in that. When we add words to music, oh boy, we get not only the emotions behind the words super heightened, also the specific sounds of that language become part of the music. All of the colors that go into the music, the human voice, the violins or the brass, but also the sounds of the language. There's the rhythm of the language, the inflection of the language, but there are also just certain sounds that are in the language. So if we were to translate, if we were to sing the Cunning Little Vixen in English instead of in Czech, we would have the understanding and it would be very moving. But two things, the inflection of Czech and the inflection of English are very, very different. You would have to add notes in order to sing it in English. You would have to add notes that aren't originally there, actually. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is the actual sounds. Now you can think about this, what makes Pélias and Mélisande sound so French? And it goes beyond Impressionism. It goes beyond Debussy's style. It's the language itself. It's the mellifluousness of the French language gives the music a certain sound. What makes Puccini or Verdi sound Italian? There's the smoothness, the legato of the language, but also the rhythmic quality of the language gives it a certain sound, certain quality. For the Czech language, without going into the inflection, I can center on a couple of sounds that are really unique to the language. And the audience is going to hear them, and it's going to become part of the fabric of Janáček's whole sound world. One of them is this sound that is unique to the languages. Okay? Or, there's two versions of that. And for example, at the very beginning, the forester comes out and he says, "We're going to have a storm. Look at the weather. We're going to have a storm." The word for storm is boshku. Boshku. And in that, you can hear the wind stirring up from the storm. It's part of the word. Right? Sounds very different than storm. Boshku. There are certain words in Czech where there are no vowels written in the word. For example, KRK is a word, and it's pronounced krk, krk, like Captain Kirk in Star Trek. Krk. It means neck. If I think of the word, and this is in the opera, srdce. Srdce. That means heart. And I think you can hear and you can feel the beating heart in that r, srdce, srdce. So that becomes, again, part of the whole expression, part of the sound world, special color that you wouldn't have if you sang it in another language. If I'm really angry at somebody and I want them to suffer, I tell them, trp. It's spelled TRP. 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 And it's usually pronounced about like that, fairly short. Trp. But there's one character in the opera, Chocholka, the main chicken, and she's angry at the vixen and she wants him to suffer. But she's not doing her work. She's not laying eggs like they are. So she sings, trp, and then she stretches it out and sings it on a high note. So she sounds like a chicken, but she's also saying a real word there, suffer. And I've seen editions of the music where they have different translations. If you want to sing it in German, you want to sing it in English. How would you translate that? Then you don't get the chicken sound that comes out of that word. So they just translate TRP and leave it alone. This opera is for everyone. It's very uplifting, very moving. There are a couple of scenes, I think you have to have your handkerchief handy, when the vixen and the fox fall in love. Just incredibly moving. And for adults, they'll be thinking, maybe when they were courting. And then there's the final scene where the forester, who's rather rough and kind of a guarded personality, almost on the vulgar side, at the very end becomes a poet, has a revelation about life. He looks at the world around him. He's gotten older, and he sees the circle of life, the beauty of life, and how he fits into that. It's so uplifting and beautiful and powerful. Mr. Charon's concept with the animation is just so creative and so fantastic. The work itself at the very beginning was based on pretty much cartoons. And so doing it in this animated version makes sense. It also fits in beautifully with Czech tradition. The Czechs were actually pioneers in animation. So this fits in perfectly. Janáček wrote it in the 1920s, and that's actually when Czech started working with motion picture cartoons. Yeah, it's great. It's fantastic. The cast is incredible. Language-wise, they sound like Czechs. They really do. They're amazing. There are children in the opera. There are adults in the opera. Wonderful imagery. I think once you see it, you'll want to come back, actually.